Vice-Chancellor and head of the, to present the welcome message. Chairperson of the African Ombudsman Research Centre Board, President of the African Ombudsman and Mediators Association, and Public Protector of South Africa, Advocate Busisiwe Mkhwebane, head of the UKZN School of Law, and member of the African Ombudsman Research Centre Board, Professor Manage Reddy. Our esteemed panel, Ombudsman of Namibia, Advocate John Walters, Mr. Leonard Ngaluma, representing the Chairperson of the Commission of Administrative Justice in Kenya and General Secretary of AOMA, Honorable Florence Kajuju, Secretary General of the International Ombudsman Institute and Austrian Ombudsman Institute will unpack their strategy for ombudsmen under threat. I have no doubt that the sharing of best practices today will enhance the capacity of ombudsmen throughout the continent. We have more webinar sessions on the horizon covering topics such as press releases, press briefings, and general communication with the press planned for the end of November, systemic investigations planned for December. I urge you to keep an eye out for communications from AORC for more details. With these few words, I welcome you to the third webinar of the AORC, and I'm sure that you will find today's session to be of great value. Thank you very much.
Public Protector of South Africa, and congratulations on this celebration of your 25th anniversary. Let me also congratulate AORC for organizing this webinar in these difficult times where it's not easy for us to get together. He's mentioned a couple of things, and I'm sure that as we progress in the discussions, we will be able to unravel more of the challenges that are facing the Ombudsman globally. We might say, in addition to the problems that are globally facing the Ombudsman, perhaps those affecting Ombudsman in Africa, in some cases appear to be more grave. But I trust that as we go through these discussions, we'll be able to, acquaint ourselves with some of these challenges, which range from poor funding, statutory limitations, organization of the mandate of the Ombudsman, poor manpower development strategies and programs and so forth. But I think that it's a welcome development that in these times when we're able to move to meet in person, we can have this opportunity to be able to meet in this webinar. So congratulations once again, the Public Protector of South Africa. I think our panelists are all with us. And from our program, we are supposed to now be listening to our first discussant. Abi, can you please place the program so I can look at it more properly since I haven't got my copy? Yes.
Opportunity and welcome to everyone for participating in this critical webinar. As Professor MacArthur has also welcomed us from the side of the University of KwaZulu-Natal. In short, to just bring everyone up to speed what AOMA is all about and AORC is all about. AOMA was founded in Ouagadougou in 2003, and it was rebranded as AOMA in 2006, which is African Ombudsman and Mediators Association. And AOMA has 44 Ombudsman and Mediators institutions across the continent. So that will also include public protectors, because in other countries we are called public protectors. And I must indicate that we also have other sectoral ombudsman institutions which are members of AOMA. And our main focus is that we vision as an international association of ombudsman and practitioners and scholars, which is dedicated to promotion of open, accountable, and people-centered democratic governance of Africa. So AOMA, as I've indicated, has 45 membership states, and we are having then the leadership of AOMA, which South Africa, as the public protector of South Africa, myself, I'm the president of AOMA, and the first vice president is from Burkina Faso, the second vice president was from Sudan, but then has now been replaced by Burundi. We have the Secretary General from Kenya, and we have the Deputy Secretary General from Seychelles, and then we've got the Treasurer from Malawi, Ombudsman of Malawi, and we also have then 6 regional coordinators, and the one from Northern Africa is led by Libya, from Southern Africa by Botswana, and from West Africa by Nigeria, from East Africa by Uganda, and we have Indian Ocean by Madagascar, and then the Central Africa by the Central African Republic. So we operate within the OR Tambo minimum standards, which is what we are following upon, and each institution which has to join the Ombudsman and Mediators Association should also reflect those standards which cover independence and autonomy of such institutions. And such institutions must be established in terms of the Constitution or guaranteed in the Constitution, and their security of tenure must be guaranteed in the Constitution, and they must be well resourced as these institutions. So the immediate goals of AOMA is also to make sure that we support the African Union in achieving the Agenda 2063, especially the Africa we want, so that it can come into reality. And as you've seen, we also have mediators, but also a lot of ombudsmen are also having that as their key mandate to mediate and or to use alternative dispute resolution mechanism. And therefore, we have the African Ombudsman Research Center, which is based at UKZN, which is the one is the engine of AOMA, and which is assisting AOMA on research, information sharing, capacity building, and advocacy. Hence, they have organized this intervention or this particular role. So today we know that the main focus will be on the threat to the Ombudsman institution. I must also indicate from the UN side, the Ombudsman, there are a lot of UN resolutions dealing with the issue of the Ombudsman and how the Ombudsman assists in the achievement of human rights countrywide. So today, then we will be hearing various speakers on how we can address the issue of the threat of against the ombudsman, especially where an ombudsman is investigating state or institutions, and also they are threatened by not being provided resources or by being threatened with litigation or criminal acts, or by being also threatened or the way they publish their office's work is being published. So those are the concerns which we have worldwide. Thank you so much, Honorable Ombudsman, Professor McCarthy, and Advocate Mpofu, who's been a practicing advocate for years, who will also share with us from the legal profession on issues which impact on the Constitution, Chapter 9 institution, but generally as the advocate who has also been in the forefront in making sure that the rights of the public is protected and there's access to justice. Thank you. Over to you, Ombudsman of Nigeria.
To begin with borrowed phrases from very eminent persons, which I will contextualize. Martin Wisting said, It is inconceivable for an ombudsman to exist and perform his task properly within any system other than a democracy governed by the rule of law. Chief Justice Mkhwebane, South Africa, I quote, "The public protector is a critical and indeed indispensable factor in the facilitation of good governance and keeping our constitutional democracy strong and vibrant," unquote. Victor Ayeni, quote, "Ultimately, every ombudsman has some room to maneuver and so cannot entirely blame its weaknesses and shortcomings on a lack of insufficient cooperation from the government in power," unquote. Before we can discuss the role of the IOI in supporting colleagues in times of crisis, we must first examine the question, who is to protect the protectors? What constitutes the first and second line of protection before the IOI can intervene? My colleague, Secretary General of the IOI, will speak about the IOI's role. Who is to protect the protected? If the Ombudsman presupposes a political and administrative system that is and wants to be a democracy governed by the rule of law with all the appropriate mechanisms of external accountability this entails, then the Ombudsman can safely rely on the protection afforded by the democratic institutions created by the political and administrative systems. They are the first line of protection of the Ombudsman, and the second line of protection is external bodies. The first line of protection, the Constitution. Under a constitutional democracy, the Constitution is the supreme law. It is binding on all branches of government. The supremacy of the Constitution requires that the obligations imposed by it must be fulfilled. The Constitution entrenches the Ombudsman, guarantees its independence, and prohibits interference with the Ombudsman in the exercise of his functions and duties. The Constitution requires that all organs of state and persons must assist and protect the Ombudsman. The language, context, and purpose of these constitutional provisions require strict compliance. However, we all know that a constitution is not self-executing. Its principles must be brought to light by those entrusted to uphold it. The government, establishing an ombudsman institution and continuously creating and maintaining the requirements for its effective functioning and its protection, are the responsibility of all branches of government. The executive is required to refrain from interference with the Ombudsman in the exercise of his or her functions, and must assist and protect the Ombudsman against any threat or intimidation. The best way to protect the Ombudsman is refraining from interference, influence, or threats to the Ombudsman. Parliament has the obligation to hold the executive accountable and plays an important role in creating safeguards for the Ombudsman when he or she comes under threat. It must ensure that the Ombudsman is free from outside pressure. The Ombudsman's integrity and effectiveness depend on the backing that Parliament gives him or her. Judiciary, courts are required by the Constitution to ensure that all branches of government act within the law and fulfill their constitutional obligations. The courts has the responsibility of being the ultimate guardian of the Constitution and bear the initial responsibility of providing protection to the Ombudsman against threat, intimidation, and reprisals. The Ombudsman, he or she must protect him or herself by abstaining from personal motives and interests. He or she must be seen to be unprejudiced and impartial. The Ombudsman is responsible to attain the highest standard of performance and his or her integrity must be beyond doubt. The Ombudsman must not only be seen as independent, but he or she must live out that independence. The Ombudsman is not an island and does not operate in isolation. Its efficiency can be best assessed in terms of how it interacts with domestic institutions and regional and international association of ombudsmen. Institutions supporting a constitutional democracy, civil society organizations, the media, legal fraternity, and sister bodies like national human rights institutions play an essential role in any democratic society. An open and constructive relationship with these institutions will ensure solidarity and support in times of need. The media may, for example, widely publish the threats, intimidation, and reprisals against the Ombudsman, and the legal fraternity may assist the Ombudsman to institute legal action to stop these threats or intimidation. The second line of protection, United Nations. Most, if not all our countries are members of the United Nations and must fulfill all obligations flowing from ratified international human rights instruments and adopted resolutions. Paragraph 11 of the General Assembly Resolution 70/163 of 17 December 2015 is equally applicable to Ombudsman. The General Assembly stresses that, and I quote, national human rights institutions and their staff should not face any form of reprisal or intimidation, including political pressure, physical intimidation, harassment, or unjustified budgetary limitations, and calls upon state to promptly and thoroughly investigate cases of alleged reprisal and intimidation, unquote. Cooperation between the Ombudsman and national human rights institutions becomes vitally necessary. Where the Ombudsman comes under threat or intimidation, the National Human Rights Institution can assist by bringing these cases of alleged threats and or intimidation to the attention of the United Nations. Challenges, and I speak specifically to myself, the Ombudsman of Namibia. First, the good news. The Ombudsman of Namibia experiences no threats from whatever corner, and no member of cabinet or the legislature or any other person ever interfered with the Ombudsman in the exercise of his duty or functions. The not so good news. We are settled with an outdated Ombudsman legislation. It is in existence since 1990 without any amendment for the past 30 years. But a new Ombudsman bill went through Cabinet Committee on Legislation, and it's now with the legal drafters to fine-tune it. It took us 5 years to reach this stage. The budget of the Ombudsman still forms part of the budget of the Ministry of Justice. However, the bill addresses this shortcoming and others. The sheer size of the country, plus minus 824,000 square kilometers, makes it difficult to reach all people all the times. We established 5 regional offices to bring the office closer to the people in order for them to exercise their right to complain and right of access to the Ombudsman. But the right to complain and ready access to the Ombudsman do not have the status of fundamental right in our legal systems. However, through our work as Ombudsman, we must raise these rights to fundamental rights. No review or response to the Ombudsman annual or special reports by the National Assembly. No working relationship between the Ombudsman and the Parliamentary Standing Committee on Constitution and Legal Affairs. Of late, the committee has sent us 2 reports and requested the Ombudsman to implement its recommendation. We responded with our 2 reports on how we implemented the recommendation. As everywhere in the world, the Ombudsman does not have enforcement power, except the Public Protector of South Africa. we rely on the National Assembly for needed authority and potential support to secure the implementation of our opinions and recommendations. Ombudsman, my latest special report, September 2020, submitted to the National Assembly, was referred to the Parliamentary Standing Committee on Public Accounts. I'm waiting to be called to account for that report. The extremely broad mandate of the Ombudsman, without the required resources, for example, we have no human rights education officer for the promotion of human rights, or an environmental specialist to assist in the environmental mandate of the Ombudsman. The no or very slow response from individual ministries, public enterprises, and even cabinet ministers on the Ombudsman's inquiry. Ladies and gentlemen, participants, panelists, in conclusion, I wish to acknowledge the commitment and courage of fellow ombudsmen throughout the world. It is expected of many of us to do a good job with little or inadequate resources, and many of us are subjected to threats and intimidation with no internal support or assistance. Yet, to our credit, we have survived against all odds, and those under threat are still without. We should commend them, as they are indispensable factors in the facilitation of good governance and keeping their constitutional democracies strong and vibrant. I thank you for listening to me.
Advocate Waters, for that succinct presentation, and also for keeping with the time of your presentation. You will be able to give us spare 2 minutes presentations, and then after that, there will be the session of questions and answers. So that's the program. If that is the case, then at this time,
gentlemen, my name is Leonard Ngaluma. I am the CEO of the Ombudsman Office in Kenya, and I'm standing in for Honorable Kajuju, our Ombudsman. Chair, my discussion will be built around 4 issues, and in these 4 issues, I will endeavor to demonstrate how the 4 issues affect the effectiveness of the Ombudsman in Africa, and I'll also be able to discuss and demonstrate the interventions and measures that can be put in place or in place to overcome the challenges. Chair, from the onset, I must emphasize that the Ombudsman Office is the last point of call for the ordinary citizen. When the ordinary citizens comes to the Ombudsman, the expectation is that this is the point at which they'll be able to have assistance over their issues, because they come in carrying a sense of despair arising from their experiences with the offices that they will have visited. So when the Ombudsman is not in a position to provide adequate assistance to the ordinary citizens for the reasons that we are going to demonstrate, then that office becomes not what was intended, but rather an office that does not inspire hope on the part of the ordinary citizen. The 4 issues around which I'm going to build up my discussion are: 1, the element of unresponsiveness; 2, the issue of reprisals; 3rd, the issue of the resource constraints; and 4th, the necessity of the Ombudsman institutions in Africa. Chair, on the first issue of unresponsiveness, in the African context of pervasive impunity, where court orders are sometimes defied, recommendations of the Ombudsman are often swept to the back burner. Particularly, non-compliance is evidence in relation to investigation reports that relate to maladministration, administrative injustices, and leadership and integrity. This usually takes many forms, among them defensiveness by the public officers, evasive responses by the same officers, inordinate and deliberate delay in responding to issues raised, and outright refusal to accept the results of the Ombudsman investigations. It is not unusual to find a public body or officer challenging the mandate and powers of the Ombudsman, politicizing the Ombudsman findings and recommendations, or seeking a favorable opinion of the Attorney General on an investigated matter. In other instances, they will say that the Ombudsman is not a court of law. In such instances, the Ombudsman is rendered ineffective and unable to inspire hope to the citizens who may otherwise consider the institution as a merely toothless dog. In my opinion, Chair, this is the most potent threat to the institution of the Ombudsman because it erodes the public confidence in the institution's ability to live up to its billing as a public defender and eventual guarantor of good governance, adherence to the rule of law, and improved public service delivery. So what then can be done to avoid this cited pitfall? One, anchorage in law. The Ombudsman investigative findings and jurisdiction should be anchored in law. This is key in providing legality and legitimacy to the processes and outcome of the Ombudsman. Chair, I must point out at this point that it remains a fact that a number of the Ombudsman institutions across Africa, they are not well anchored in the Constitution, and at times even the constitutive law, it is not strong enough to provide these necessary safeguards. At this point, may I
Mr. Ngaluma, can you please unmute yourself?
Hello, am I okay now? Do you hear me? You can hear me now. So I was indicating, Chair, that we have just started a referendum process that was launched yesterday. And one of our exciting issues captured in the draft documents is a recommendation that at the end of this process, the law that creates the Ombudsman Office has to be relooked so as to ensure that the necessary amendments are done to ensure that the decisions of the Ombudsman are binding. And that to us is a very exciting development in the sense that it will be a development that will enable us to overcome the challenges that have arisen in the past for the reasons of a weak legal framework. Exercise caution in decision to investigate. Ombudsman should be reluctant to take up political dispute whose solution may lie purely on political settlements. In such instances, the Ombudsman should consider the likely outcomes of such disputes before their admission. In such cases, the advisory jurisdiction of the Ombudsman is more appropriate than carrying out investigations. The third intervention would be thoroughness of our investigations. Authorities are more likely to implement Ombudsman recommendations when they can trust that the Ombudsman has been even-handed, relied on credible evidence, and objective standards. And at this point, I wanted to reinforce that by quoting A.D. Traore of Burkina Faso in her paper, Crusaders Without a Sword, an Insight and Challenges in Enforcing Ombudsman Decisions, the case of Burkina Faso, a presentation made during the second Regional Colloquium of African Ombudsmen and Institutions on the theme of securing Ombudsman as an instrument of governance held in Kenya sometimes in 2015. And Traore says The Ombudsman must conduct investigations seriously and be persuasive in seeking a response in light of the findings of such investigations. The fourth intervention under the same is to avoid ambiguity and making specific recommendations. Ombudsman should avoid generalities in its findings and determinations upon conclusion of investigations. General findings and determinations create ambiguity and excuses for non-implementation. Fourth, seeking judicial support. A supportive judiciary is key to the effectiveness of the Ombudsman quasi-judicial jurisdiction in terms of affirming the Ombudsman powers to give binding decisions and also sanctioning individuals who fail to comply with the determinations. Lastly is a political goodwill. While the legal framework and stewardship of the Ombudsman are critical, political will facilitates the effectiveness of the Ombudsman and ensures full implementation of its decisions. Political will entails not only compliance with the decisions, but also cooperating during investigations. This ultimately engenders a culture of respect for the Ombudsman and the rule of law. The second issue in my paper, Chair, as I indicated, will be reprisals. These often take the form of budget cuts, politicization of the Ombudsman, instigation of removal proceedings against the persons of the Ombudsman, or even threats of merger and threats to abolish the institution of the Ombudsman altogether. How can the Ombudsman avoid this pitfall? One, legislative provisions on the independence of the institution of the Ombudsman should act as a safeguard against these threats. These include security of tenure, direct budgetary allocation from the consolidated funds, establishment of the Ombudsman institution as a creature of the Constitution, which therefore as a supreme law over the land, then there'll be no room for any other questions to come up or unnecessary challenges. The third issue that I touched on, that I'll now speak to, is the matter regarding resource constraints. These may result from the budget cuts or genuinely harsh economic times. The Ombudsman Office is oftentimes not considered a first-tier priority by cash-strapped governments. In difficult economic conditions, most government must prioritize other dockets leading to reduced allocation to the Ombudsman. This may leave the Ombudsman unable to effectively carry out its functions unless engagement with non-state actors to supplement budgets is attained. What still is the need to align and provide the Ombudsman Office with popular government agenda items or global initiatives to be deemed relevant for the budget allocation. Anything to the contrary, then you are left vulnerable. How then can the Ombudsman avoid this pitfall of a resource constraint? Robust resource allocation. Pursue strategic donor funding while maintaining independence of the Ombudsman Office. 2, target setting. Align Ombudsman work with national and global development goals, such as the UN Sustainable Goals and the 2063 African Union Agenda. The nascency of the Ombudsman institution in Africa. The contemporary institution of the Ombudsman is relatively new in Africa. The first such institution having been established in Tanzania in the year 1966. Majority of the Ombudsman in Africa were established in the post-1980s against the backdrop of nascent states emerging from colonial rules, where the notion of holding government to account was hitherto alien. Other than also coming out from the colonial rule, we are also aware that up to the years of the 1980s, when we have many of our bodies coming into existence, many African countries are coming out of the one-party system, where dictatorship was rife, and it's also the time when we are having the wind of change, and therefore moving these countries from the dictatorial leadership to a situation where we have more space, democracy, and therefore bodies like Ombudsman coming in to deepen good governance within Africa. It may very well be argued that the African Ombudsman is experiencing teething problem as the institution. Public officials and citizens are progressively coming to terms with its utility. As a nascent concept, the Ombudsman in Africa may be amenable to pressures that may not exist in the public sector bureaucracy in older democracies. What then can we be able to do? One, learn from the front runners. Make use of benchmarking visits, conferences, workshops, and trainings. We have countries where the Ombudsman institution has been existent for so many years, and therefore those who are fairly new, they stand a good opportunity to benchmark and get to learn more from those who have been there longer. Two, public sensitization and awareness creation forums. Create a public understanding and appreciation of the role of the Ombudsman to get ourselves more support from our stakeholders from across the board, both political and the non-political stakeholders. Decentralization. Avail Ombudsman services to the grassroots to serve a wider public segment and enhance visibility. After all, Chairman, again, I re-emphasize the fact that the Ombudsman existence, its faster and key focus is to ensure that the ordinary citizen is able to live and function in a country where good governance is deepened, where there is a rule of law, and there is also respect for human rights. Thank you, Chair. That will be my brief discussion on the 4 issues. Chair, you can hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ngaluma, for that presentation. We are making progress, colleagues. Advocate Waters have dealt with issues of major issue of who protects the protector, and gave us some insight into the available, remedies that you can have. Ngaluma has sent respondents to complaints handling by the Ombudsman, the resource constraints, and then the results that follow investigation by the Ombudsman. Thank you also for keeping your time. You'll be able to conclude your presentation within the time frame allowed for you. And so we shall proceed to the next presenter, Advocate Ali. We'll access the.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Advocate Mkhwebane, President of AOMA, and the Chair and other colleagues. Well, for a minute, I thought I had been promoted to the Office of Chief Justice by the Chair. Thank you. I will start. Yes, and Professor MacArthur, thank you for hosting us. Thank you very much. I'm going to try also just to be succinct so that I can keep to the time. As a practicing advocate, I get paid for talking too much, so I hope I will not go over the time. I want to start by saying that I'm going to give maybe 3 or 4 big ideas around this topic. The first big idea for me is that the topic is very appropriate, and that if we're talking about threats to ombudsman, in my view, those threats are almost inherent in the job. And therefore it's an occupational hazard. I think it would be naive to expect an effective ombudsman in any sphere to be without threats, because the office itself is born out of the need to protect vulnerable people from very powerful instances in society. In other words, if there was, nice equality and equilibrium and everyone did what they were supposed to do, there would be no need for an office such as an ombuds office. It is there to try and mediate the power relations in society. And invariably, it is to protect one or other vulnerable group against the powerful. And maybe some of the threats might be potential and unrealized in certain jurisdictions, but they are still lurking and looming somewhere in the background. In South Africa, we have a few ombudsman's offices in the insurance industry, tax sector, and so on. But the super ombud, if you like, is obviously our public protector. And that is the topic that I'm going to address. Now, the name of the office itself, as we decide, our founding mothers and fathers of our constitution decided to name it the public protector. And that name itself should tell you something, that the intention was obviously to protect the public against the excesses of public power, so to speak. And ironically, that same public power is also conferred by the Constitution. But the same Constitution then puts an institution such as the public protector to make sure that there are limits to the exercise of public power. Because if it is unchecked, then obviously the mischief that we were trying to prevent by the institution of that office will be realized. And so my starting point, I think, is much like that of Advocate Walters, which is that today's topic really can be read as protecting the protectors, or as he put it, who will protect the protectors. Now, the second big idea, I think, is also to distinguish between the office or the institution and individuals. We are talking about the protection of the office, and more accurately, the institution of ombudsman, and not so much the protection of the individual incumbents from time to time. But we must not be naive into thinking that those two things can be separated, like by Chinese walls, because sometimes the institutional attacks are centered around individuals who might be heading the office from time to time. But it's important to keep the perspective that it is the institution that should be our concern. Any resilient institution is one that is able to perpetuate itself. You can think of some of the prominent institutions that we know, the Catholic Church or the church itself generally, the Olympics, those kinds of institutions. Or one of the most underrated institutions, in my view, which is the family. All those institutions from time to time might be headed by one person or another, but their resilience and longevity depends really on not just on the leadership at a particular time, but on the rules that keep that institution, or the constitution, if you like. Now, to be able to preserve any institution, you have to have immutable rules that can survive any attack, so to speak. And I just want to pause there by talking about some of the experiences we are having in South Africa. And if you allow me to, I'll just for a few minutes just talk about my role in this. I, as an advocate or counsel in our courts, I participated in some of the most groundbreaking cases in this area of law or constitution. Under our previous public protector, I was involved in the famous Nkandla case, or EFF versus National Speaker of the National Assembly, which really laid the grounds, I think, internationally for what this office should be like, and gave more powers to our public protector in particular. I was also involved in another important case, which was about the release of the public protector's state capture report, which has now brought into South Africa something called the Zondo Commission, or a State Capture Commission. And those were very significant cases that shifted the definition of what the office is supposed to represent. Now, more importantly, at the present moment, under the current public protector, I'm involved in various cases, and I thought just to spell out the kinds of threats that one can get from in this important office. I'll just mention to you 3 or 4 of the cases that I'm involved in, which are ongoing now. The first one is a case called Baloyi versus Public Protector. And that case is in our constitutional court. And it deals with a threat that came from internally, from within the office itself. Because in that case, it was somebody who was the chief operation officer of the public protector's office, who basically was trying to ride the popular wave, in protecting her own job, as it were. But all that was politicized as a measure to threaten the public protector. Second case is a case of our South African Revenue Services versus the public protector. And in that case, ironically, the threat came from another organ of state, which is seeking to limit the powers of the public protector and enlarge its own powers, so to speak. And very interesting case that we are waiting for judgment in our constitutional court. The third one is a case of Godan versus public protector, which is a cabinet minister, challenging a report and making all sorts of disparaging remarks about a public protector. And in that case, ironically, what we have done is to invoke the contempt provisions in our act to stop basically the tendency of ad hominem attacks on the public protector. And the last one, and the biggest of them all, is the one that we're dealing with, which is about the removal of the public protector. And that's the ultimate, obviously, threat that you can have, which is the threat of removal. And that is a case which is being spearheaded by an opposition party called the Democratic Alliance. And I would invite all of you to watch the developments in that particular case, because, as I say, it deals with probably the ultimate threat to any public protector. Now, what I really want to say about the measures, the specific measures, I wanted to use a comparative analysis using 2 examples, comparing ombudsman's offices with the office of a judge on the one hand, and then comparing the office of an ombudsman with the office of, or not the office, with whistleblowers. And I'm using those 2 examples for advisedly, because in my view, the office of the public protector should be protected in the same way as the office of the judicial office. And at the same time, most jurisdictions will have legislation that protects whistleblowers. We have one here in South Africa. And that also lessons can be learned from that a lot. And the central thesis of what I want to say is really this. Despite, in South Africa in particular, despite the presence of such strong and very strong legislation, I participated in its formulation on the protection of whistleblowers. And despite very strong institutional and constitutional mechanisms for the protection of public protectors, the reality is that on a daily basis, we have whistleblowers who are victimized by employers because of the power relations. And similarly, we have the public protector in South Africa in particular, who is under siege because of the reports that relate to the most powerful members of society. So we do have all the institutional mechanisms. If you look at our, and I'll mention there are 5 areas which are important for protecting an ombuds. One is security of tenure, and we have that in place in South Africa because Section 183 of our Constitution provides for the appointment of a public protector for 7-year non-renewable period. The second one is the salary, the payment. And again, we have Section 2.2 of our Public Protector Act, which states that the remuneration of the public protector shall not be less than that of a judge. And then we have the very wide powers which were defined in the Nkandla case, as I mentioned earlier. And then we have strong constitutional and legislative protective measures, which oblige the public organs of state to support the independence of the public protector. Then, of course, the most important area for me where reprisals indirectly can be meted out to a public protector is the lack of institutional independence, which manifests itself in budgets and those kinds of ways to squeeze a public protector. And the ultimate one is what I call the difficulty of removal. It should always be made difficult to remove a public protector. And that protection in our Constitution is provided by Section 194, which requires a two-thirds majority of the National Assembly to pass such a law. But the point I'm making is that despite all those institutional mechanisms, the biggest threat will happen when the most powerful forces in society wittingly or unwittingly conspire against the office. And some of those powerful forces would be the big business, the media, and unfortunately, sometimes even the courts themselves. And unfortunately, that's where we are in South Africa. And my analysis of the situation is that to answer the question of protecting the protectors, the only institution that will protect the protectors is the people themselves. So ironically, as we call it the public protector, I think that it is the public that can protect the public protector. Because in our case, whether the public does that through NGOs or it does it through its elected representatives in a democracy, is what ultimately will assist us. And I think that our public protector in particular, embarked on a lot of outreach programs and roadshows to explain the work of the public protector to the public. And that, what might look like a small effort, is for me what would ultimately protect the public protector, because the vested interests themselves will not do so unless there is a pressure from the public. And now I just want to end off by saying, for example, in this case of the removal of our public protector, one of the most encouraging signs is that 2 weeks ago, the courts have agreed now to consolidate our case with the case of an NGO which is supporting the public protector. And that, for me, I think is where the protection will come from. Not so much from us as the lawyers, but from the fact that it is the public itself that is standing up and saying so much and no more. Thank you very much.
I'm very reluctant to withdraw that promotion. I have the support of the Public Protector of South Africa to retain it at the appropriate date. Thank you very much for your presentation. Very incisive, and also a lot to learn from the legal framework in South Africa, which has provided rather dynamic provisions for protecting the protector. Thank you very much once again. The next presenter is Mr. Werner Amon. Mr. Werner Amon isn't able to make it, but luckily he's already sent in his presentation, which I now request Frank to play for our listening. So Frank, please play Mr. Werner's presentation.
Research Center did a wonderful job in bringing us all together, despite the limitations we experienced because of COVID-19. It is important that the Ombudsman community continues to be in touch and to exchange experiences and best practices, especially in difficult times like these. I'm therefore happy that we find ways and tools to meet electronically so that we can keep learning from each other. The topic of this webinar is Ombudsman under threat, and I have to emphasize that this topic is a very important one indeed. Unfortunately, the issue of Ombudsman under threat has become more and more relevant in the past few years. So much that helping Ombudsman under threat has become one of the core objectives of the International Ombudsman Institute. This is my second year as Secretary General of the IOI, and I've already seen several cases where colleagues came under attack and asked for our support. But let me start with some basic information about the IOI before I talk about the topic I got, Ombudsman under threat, in more details. The IOI was established in 1978, and it is the only global organization for the cooperation of independent ombudsman institutions worldwide. At the moment, we have 205 member institutions from more than 100 countries. Our members are parliamentary ombudsmen and at the national, but also on the regional or local level. The IOI is committed to promoting the ombudsman concept, and we do this in different ways. We encourage the creation of ombudsman institutions where they do not exist. We promote exchange and share learning among our members by organizing conferences, seminars, or trainings initiatives. We fund research and regional projects on ombudsman-related matters. We foster an ongoing dialogue with international organizations and regional partners, associations such as the African Ombudsman and the Mediators Association. And last but not least, we support colleagues who come under threat or who operate under difficult circumstances. Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, Ombudsman institutions are an essential and necessary element in every democracy. They are an important mechanism to ensure good governance and the rule of law. They make public administration more transparent and accountable. They protect people against violation of rights and the abuse of power. They uphold, protect, and promote human rights. But most importantly, they always abide by the core principles of independence and impartiality when they fulfill their mandate. As I have said at the beginning, it happens more frequently that ombudsmen contact the IOI to inform about the difficult circumstances they face or attacks against them and their offices. As the only global organization for the promotion of ombudsman institutions all over the world, the IOI takes these reports very seriously. We have made it our clear priority to support members in need. Threats to ombudsman institutions come in a variety of forms, but the reason why they happen is usually the same. They are a direct response to the Ombudsman's work, to our fight against the abuse of power, and to our efforts to protect human rights. When do we talk about threats? Well, from the IOI's point of view, any action which can put the independent operation and exercise of the Ombudsman institution at risk can be seen as a threat. The IOI witnessed different examples of how colleagues can come under pressure. Let me give you some examples of what we consider a matter of ombudsman under threat. The office faces budget cuts or cuts in staff members. Parliaments refuse to discuss the Ombudsman's report. Damaging remarks or verbal attacks are made against the Ombudsman publicity. The office faces organizational changes or changes of its mandate. The legal basis is changed in a way that reduces the independence of the office. Ombudsmen are unlawfully removed from office, or new ombudsmen are simply not appointed. Political pressure is put on the ombudsman and the staff. The political environment in the country is generally unstable. There is actual ill treatment, harassment, or death threats against the ombudsman. This is all very theoretical, and I would like to give you some real-life examples, which we have experienced in the past few years. These examples will not only paint a picture of what is happening to colleagues, it will also show that ombudsmen come under threat in every part of the world. It is not a phenomenon that's limited to certain regions or countries. Unfortunately, we find cases of colleagues under attack in Africa, Europe, Latin America, North America, simply everywhere. But now some quick examples to make the broad variety of threats and attacks more visible. The Ombudsman of Slovakia and the Ombudsman for Bermuda both experienced strong reactions from their governments for the criticism they voiced in their annual report. The former public protector of South Africa even faced death threats when she published an investigation report on the excessive spending behavior of President Zuma. Sometimes the threat is less obvious. Restrictions of budget or staff also make it difficult for Ombudsman office to operate effectively. The Ombudsman of Poland, for example, faced and a lot of budget cuts and potential limitation to his mandate. In Argentina, the position of the National Ombudsman and the National Ombudsman for Children has been vacant for years, and Parliament simply fails not appoint successors, which also weakens the institutions significantly. The Ombudsman of Ontario in Canada faced changes to the institution's legislation to enable the suspension of the Ombudsman without cause, which would have fundamentally undermined the independence of the office. In Italy and Spain, entire institutions at the regional level were abolished under the pretext of an economic crisis or austerity measures. Colleagues in Bolivia, Guatemala and Uruguay faced damaging remarks and public attacks from government officials simply because they do their work. For example, they criticized the human rights situation in the country, or they spoke out to support of vulnerable groups such as LGBT communities. The situation becomes critical when an entire country struggles with political instability and democracy itself is at stake. In a situation like this, fellow ombudsmen can even face personal harassments, prisons, or death threats. Unfortunately, we lost an esteemed colleague when the Ombudsman of Baja, California in Mexico was shot and killed in 2017. The alarming number of incidents raised some very important questions for us as an organization. What is the IOI's role in such cases? What can members expect from the IOI as an organization? How can the IOI assist members in the best way possible? How can the IOI, as a non-political organization, still maintain the necessary distance to make sure we don't interfere in the political affairs of a state? We took a first step at the 10th IOI World Conference in Wellington in 2012, where the IOI General Assembly adopted the Wellington Declaration, which states that ombudsmen shall not be subject to any form of physical, mental, or unjustified legal coercion or financial restrictions which limit their independence or their ability to protect the fundamental rights of all persons. We once again spoke out in support of colleagues under threat at the 11th IOI World Conference in Bangkok in 2016, where the IOI General Assembly adopted the Bangkok Declaration, which stipulates that ombudsmen diligently fulfilling their mandate shall not be subject to any form of physical, mental, or unjustified legal coercion, and that the IOI condemns any intimidation and reprisals, such as restrictions of budget, staff, or mandate against the independent work of the ombudsman, and that the IOI calls upon national governments to promptly investigate cases of alleged intimidation and reprisals against the ombudsman and take appropriate action. In Bangkok, the IOI Board of Directors also presented a set of IOI guidelines on the support to colleagues under threat. This guideline lists different ways in which the IOI can lend its support, and they help us coordinate our courses of action when we support ombudsmen under threat. We usually hear about problematic developments from the ombudsman institutions itself and from colleagues or the regional president of a region. Sometimes the IOI Secretariat becomes aware of attacks against ombudsmen when they study online media coverage of different matters. In these cases, we proactively get in touch with the Ombudsman institution to see if they would require our help. From our experience, we identified two general rules which we tried to apply if possible. First, when somebody is under attack, you need to act quickly, immediate, and timely action is very, very essential. Second, communication and coordination are important. Any action at all stages of the process is closely coordinated with the ombudsman in question. So when we learned about the case where a colleague comes under threat, what are the first steps we take? In order to strengthen our position and to have substantive arguments at hand, we first gather information from as many sources as possible. Different sources to develop a well-informed opinion usually are the member institution in need of support itself, fellow ombudsmen from the region and the respective regional president, impartial contact points such as embassies based in the country, media coverage on the matter. Once we have gathered enough information, or at least as much as information as the narrow time frame allows for, we select the most appropriate course of action. The IOI Secretariat presents the facts of the case in the IOI Executive Committee and the respective regional president, who will then decide the appropriate course of action. These decisions are made based on the following criteria. Did we take the best interest of the Ombudsman into account? Did we ensure the necessary sensitivity to the case? Did we evaluate the exciting and existing national context? Finally, yet very importantly, the chosen way forward is always approved by the Ombudsman in need of support. The IOI's course of action can take different forms. As already mentioned, we need to evaluate the situation first and consult with the Ombudsman in question. Based on this information, we then take one of the following actions. If a more discreet approach is recommended, we send a letter signed by the IO President and the Secretary General and the respective regional president directly to the government or to Parliament, addressing the matter and showing our concern. If we like to reach a broader public, we publish an open statement on our website expressing the IOI's concern on the matter. This is usually also distributed via our weekly newsletter. If joint forces seem convenient to bring our message abroad more strongly, we coordinate our action with relevant national or regional stakeholders, for example, regional ombudsman associations or ombudsman networks. Finally, we may consider conducting a fact-finding mission. In this case, we send an IOI delegation to the colleague in need of support to take evidence in the country. The IOI has only carried out one fact-finding mission so far to support our colleague in Poland. It was a combined effort with international partners, organizations, and we presented the result in a press conference in Poland, including a report of our findings and our recommendation to strengthen the Ombudsman. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope I've been able to give you more insight into what the IOI can do and has done for colleagues who have come under attack, who experienced pressure or who operated under very difficult circumstances. I would like to encourage all of you to get in touch with us whenever you have concern about the possible threat to your own institution or to a fellow ombudsman institution. I thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much in absentia, Werner, who is the Secretary General of the International Ombudsman Institute and the Ombudsman of Austria. So thank you for that presentation. With that presentation, to the end of the presentation. The next phase and answer. 35 minutes. Like I can see from our clock. We may not be able to give me the 35 minutes. Hello, can Frank hear me?
We can hardly hear you, but we still have time for question and answers.
Yes, we have questions and answers, 35 minutes for this clock, South African time. I mean 12 o'clock South African time, which is our time to close. So I am asking, can we still give the 35 minutes so take the time that is available to us now?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. We can still take the 35 minutes.
We can still take the 35 minutes.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so time for questions and answers. We have had all the 4 presentations. 3 of the presenters are physically on ground to take their questions. And I am informed that Advocate Ali Mpofu will have to be leaving us in due course. So even though he was the 3rd presenter, we would advise that questions that are directed to him should come first. So we have the first opportunity to answer questions directed at his presentation. So the floor is now open. Can we have questions and answers, particularly on the 3rd presentation by Advocate Mpofu, please?
Chief, the questions are already asked. They are on the Q&A answer icon on the bottom of your screen. If you can just open there and read the questions, see if there's any that is directed to Advocate Mpofu.
We have a question from Jane Lava. Would it be helpful to have a community association of African ombudsmen? I think that's a general question. It may not necessarily be for Mpofu. As the South African Public Protector put into action Minority Protection Acts in the South African Constitution, I think that can be answered by Mpofu because his presentation actually spoke of his experiences in dealing with the threats of the Ombudsman in South Africa. So for Mpofu, I think you can take that question from Jean Lava on whether the South African Public Protector puts into action Minority Protection Act in the South African Constitution.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, no, there are no specific minority protections in the South African Constitution, but as I said, an interpretation of some of the measures, some of the constitutional measures can be read as minority protections. For example, as I said, the fact that organs of state have to protect the independence of the public protector and impartiality and dignity as a matter of constitutional obligation. Another example that I can think of is the mechanisms in section 194 of our Constitution, which I mentioned, which ensures that the public protector can only be removed by a 2/3 majority. Now, what that means, obviously, is that unless if there was a single party that wielded such a majority, the removal could not take place without the participation of minority parties. So it becomes important, both in the appointment and the removal of the public protector, to have the support of minority parties. So a difference could be done by a party which has 1 member or 2 members, for example, even though our National Assembly has 400 members. Yeah, so it's those types of measures which are obviously welcome additions to make sure that no single force theoretically could, because they were unhappy with a particular outcome or a report, could simply remove the public protector.
Thanks very much, Dr. Mpofu. I think you can attempt this question too. Is anonymous. It says, yeah, that's emphasized that the ombudsman must be seen to be impartial. And it says, would there be a discussion on structural effects of the ombudsman office, for example, whether a particular legislative is incomplete? No. It says it's critical for the ombudsman
I think the question
to be partial to any political party or faction. This exception is fueled by certain ombuds using senior officials of political parties as counsel. Do you think this is wise?
So I can't answer that question. So you saying opposition parties as what?
As counsel.
Can't hear that.
Counsel.
Okay, all right. I can't hear properly, but I think I get the gist of the question. Yeah, on impartiality, as I said earlier, obviously the way that a public protector...
Frankie, please restart the video. The video is stopped. The video is stopped, Frankie. Restart it. Frankie, can you unmute my video? That's what they're having problem getting me. Please go ahead.
Yes, thank you. Yeah. No, I was saying that the role of political parties is crucial. Firstly, let's start with the impartiality. One of the ways in which a particular ombud may protect himself or herself is obviously by adhering to the prescripts that have been mentioned before of impartiality expressed in the phrase of performing their duties without fear, favor, well, most importantly, fear. And prejudice. But the fear is obviously instilled by what I call the important and powerful forces in society. Now, in the cases that I have spoken about, both in relation to the previous public protector and this one, the role of political parties has been critical. And particularly minority parties, small parties. In the Nkandla case, I represented small parties, two small parties. One was called Pope, other one was called the UDM. Neither one of them had more than 3 or 4 members in parliament. The famous Nkandla case was brought out by political parties that were minority parties as well in parliament. And even currently, on the other hand, the removal of the public protector, the effort towards that is spearheaded by a minority party in more senses than one in South Africa. So I think that political parties obviously operate from a selfish or self-preservation point of view. So on one day when the report favors them, they will praise the public protector. And when there's another report that is criticizing them, then they will condemn him or her. That is to be expected from any partisan institution. But the role of political parties is critical, as I said, both in the appointment and the attempts to remove a public protector. So I don't think it would serve any public protector any purpose to align himself or herself with any one particular party, because obviously these are parties that are in competition. So it will simply alienate the rest of the political parties who will invariably be have the power to effect reprisals. So it is incumbent upon a public protector under the rubric of impartiality to serve all political players in the same way or see them through the same eyes.
Thank you very much. It looks like you still have to take the next question, which is also related. And this one comes from Deputy Ombudsman in Nigeria, specifically Ombudsman Theophilus Azage. He says, what does an ombudsman do in a situation where his views on government misdemeanor coincide with the views of an opposition party?
Yeah, well, that's a very good question. I think that's what
Can I add something?
Yes.
Yes,
Can
please.
I add something, Advocate? And,
that question, yes.
Yeah, I think Advocate Mpofu, yeah, the first question, I think they were saying, why do I use you as a counsel to represent me when you are a member of an opposition party, or you serve in or you were serving as a senior official of a political party as counsel. So the person was saying the perception which is fueled by certain ombudsmen using senior officials of political parties as counsel. So I think you will have to then address the issue of objectivity of counsel and the work you are doing across the spectrum as an advocate. I think that is also very critical from the legal profession side, and what people must view as, because you cannot just stay away from an advocate because that advocate belongs to this particular political party. So I think it links up to this deputy ombudsman issue in a way.
Yes, okay, thank you. Yes, I think the two questions are linked. Thank you for that question. Well, I didn't want earlier to be talking too much about myself, but I might have to. Look, put it this way, with me, but in particular, my credentials in this area are such that, I was the first chairperson of something called the National Anti-Corruption Forum, which was appointed in the National in 1999, I think. So this is an area that I have a passion on, and I referred, for example, to the whistleblowing legislation and even our National Anti-Corruption Act, which were all drafted during my time in that space. But more importantly, obviously, the issue of political or impartiality and objectivity on the part of a professional, I think is something that is paramount. And in my particular case, again, without talking too much about myself, that is illustrated by the fact that in the past, maybe 2 years or so, I have acted for probably more than half of the political parties in our parliament. Sometimes even when they are fighting against each other, I act for one faction against the other, and then the next day the one that was against yesterday is my client, and so on. So I've acted for, as I said earlier, COPE, the UDM, those were political parties in the Nkandla case. I've acted for the Inkatha Freedom Party. I've acted for the ANC, which is the ruling party, many times. I've acted for the National Freedom Party, and you name it, the very few parties that the PAs. I'm now acting for the Pan-Africanist Congress, which is another political party. And so I suppose it is the credentials of a particular practitioner are able to bring all those people to seek your services. But to come to the deputy ombudsperson's question, my view is that when we talk about impartiality and no fear, no favor, it should not concern any ombudsperson that their view in a particular matter coincide with a particular political party. Invariably, as you know, usually the political parties would be the complainants themselves because they fight against each other in the political space. So the question of impartiality is such that, as I said earlier, one day you might have a report that agrees with a particular political party. The following day you might have one that condemns them, depending on the facts of each particular case. And if it so happens that a particular political party is a serial complainant, it doesn't mean that you must just say, oh, well, this time I must disagree with them just because I agreed with them yesterday. The question must always be guided by the facts of the case.
Thank you very much, Advocate Mpofu. I think at this time we can discharge you, having properly dealt with the questions directed at you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, colleagues. Very enjoyable. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Yeah, so now while we encourage all persons who happen to join us to ask questions in areas where they have issues to raise, we wait for that. But in the meantime, the questions that have been addressed very important. We may have the other presenters to have a view on them. So while we await additional questions, which I'm checking in the submissions here, if either presenters, Advocate Waters or Ngaluma, if you have anything you want to add to the three questions that have been taken by Advocate Mpofu, you can make your intervention, please. Are you with me?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yes. Can you hear me now?
Yes. I can hear you, yes.
Okay. The issue which was raised with a question and which was amplified by a colleague, Public Protector South Africa, is I don't think you always choose the best to represent you. And I don't think it is an issue, or it will send a message of partiality when in this particular case, the public protector brief and instruct a advocate who's simultaneously a member of a political party in South Africa, of the opposition party. I think, and that is why I said earlier that the Ombudsman's integrity must be beyond a doubt. And that is why she confidently approached, in her humble view, the best legal representative to put her case to the court. And that is her choice. And I cannot find fault with that. Just because the person is from a political party, you can make use of him as a legal representative. It is all about your integrity. And that is what you must always have to safeguard. Thank you. That's all I have to say on that one.
Thank you very much. Maybe just to remind ourselves that in law, the case of the client is not the case of the advocate. So the case remains that of the client, and the advocate comes in a professional perspective only. Thank you. So any other intervention can happen? Ngaluma, do you want to intervene?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. But just briefly, by pointing out that the Ombudsman functions in a political environment. The governments that forms the governments within which we function are political entities. The interactions and everything that we do, you cannot be able to remove the Ombudsman from that political context. And therefore, as it has been emphasized, so long as there is adherence to integrity and the key principles of our ombudsmanship, really, we cannot be able to fault when an ombudsman appears to be getting a representation from an advocate who has pronounced, their political position vis-a-vis a political party. We aren't functioning in an island.
Thank you. Now we have another question there from Chille. Could it help to have a committee association of African ombudsmen? Well, I think that exists, but just Advocate Busisiwe, can you answer that? Since you are the president of AOMA. The question is, would it help to have a committee association of African ombudsmen?
Thank you, facilitator, Ombudsman from Nigeria. Yes, it helps because we have the African Ombudsman and Mediators Association, and as I've indicated earlier, we have a membership of 44 ombudsmen as an institution, and thereafter the 44 countries in the continent also includes the sectoral ombudsman. A lot of them are from South Africa because like your insurance ombudsman, your banking ombudsman, and all the military ombudsman. And also then we have regional coordinators where they are also working in each region to consolidate and support each other. So definitely it does help to have a committee which is well an association in ourselves. So we do have that, and it's existing and it's operating very well, since we have such engagements where we are sharing expertise and experiences, and we deliberate on issues impacting on an ombudsman. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And, this question is also directly to you, incidentally. Does the South African Public Protector put into action minority protection acts in the South African Constitution?
I think this one advocates.
You should be right, not ask, but
yeah, definitely the South African Constitution protects the rights of every person. Actually, it's not only focusing on South African citizens. Our Constitution is so open, it says everyone, especially under the Bill of Rights. Therefore, it's protecting even the minorities, because there are also minorities who also are protected and are having a right to self-determination. And in South Africa, we have a place where you find some nationality, in fact, Afrikaners who are staying in that particular place, who have their own flag and their own currency, but they are in South Africa. So that's how we reflect, and the Constitution protects them.
okay, thank you very much. Somewhere, and we're trying to see if we can get them open. Frankie, I have an indication that there are 10 questions somewhere. I can't see them. I can only see these ones I've been able to address.
Chief, they are in the question and answer, the Q&A. I think you've been reading some of them. Like you just need to scroll down. There's a scroller, you need to scroll down because you read the first, second, third question, and you just need to scroll down to read the other questions. In total, there are 12 questions there.
Yeah, thank you, Frankie.
Sure.
The next question, when they should deal with the national government who cannot provide financial aid or assistance devices for people with disabilities in their country. Is there any best practice so it can influence the government? I think that's an open question. I've made this presentation by tape, so it's not physically available. So that is open. How to? He suggested that they should deal with the governments. I'm not too sure I listened to the presentation very well, but I think he provided the means by which the approach that the IOI takes. It goes through investigations. It consults regional members of the IOI before making a case. And he did emphasize that in all cases, the IOI considers not just the personal interest of the ombudsperson or institution under threat, but also the rationality of the case in question. So I believe that where the IOI feels that the government is wrong, that is when it can go against such governments. We have additional intervention in that area. Okay, otherwise, then we take the question, which is for National Advocate Waters. Yeah, you said you need an anchor, the recommendations in law. What kind of mechanism would serve this purpose if it is not in the Constitution? So, Advocate Waters, that question is directed at you. You told us that we need the legal anchor for our actions as ombudsmen. So the question is, if such anchor is not in the Constitution, how do you, introduce it in the process? Can you unmute?
Now? Can you hear me now?
Yes. Yes. Thank you, Waters.
Okay. Can you hear me? Sorry.
Yes, I can hear you, Waters.
Okay. Thank you for the question.
I can hear you.
Thank you for the question, but I believe the person who posed that question misunderstood me. I said the ombudsman does not have enforcement power. He or she, and in my specific case, I have to rely on the National Assembly for the needed authority and potential support to secure the implementation of my opinions and recommendations. And I refer to my latest report of September 2020, which I submitted to the National Assembly, which was referred to the Standing Committee on Public Accounts. That specific special report I submitted to the National Assembly because a particular minister either refused or just ignored my recommendation, which I requested him to implement. And mandated by my legislation, I have to file a special report to the National Assembly. I did it, and now we're waiting for the Standing Committee on Public Accounts to call me and to see whatever they want to do to help me to enforce my recommendation. Because Parliament represents the final enforcement power of the Ombudsman. And even I'm not aware of any legislation where it is stated in law that the Ombudsman's recommendation is binding on all organs of state. In any event, not in the case of the Ombudsman. We have to rely, some of us argue that we have to use our persuasive power, but you can sometimes be how persuasive. But even if a member of the executive refuses to implement your recommendation, you either submit your special report to the National Assembly or you go to court in order to enforce your recommendation. Thank you. I hope I made me clear to the
very much, Advocate Waters. Yeah, the next question comes from Nigeria, and I think the President of AOMA will take that question. He says, what is AOMA doing to help Nigerian ombudsmen in the challenge in terms of poor budgeting? So you're the President, so I think the question is for you. Public Protector of South Africa.
Yes, the question from Bello, Basira Bello. If I think as a AOMA, if we receive it's not, I don't think it's poor budgeting. Maybe it's the issue of lack of resources for the office, which also they depend on the government to provide the resources. And that is a challenge which is happening for all ombudsman institutions, because we depend on our various governments, financial or fiscus, to be able to operate. Therefore, I think the very same issue of not funding us properly, or as well taking away our budget, it's also one of the things which the IOI in their guideline is saying this is also a way of putting the Ombudsman Office under threat. So I think if this is also raised with the Minister of Finance or the Treasury of the government, at least to provide enough resources for the Ombudsman, that will be very helpful, so that the Ombudsman Office will be able then to have issues are very key, because they're possible to meet indeed, because the staff is, and sometimes you find that we are not funded enough, and okay, thank you. I think I got cut there.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yes, I agree with you. We've had that situation in Nigeria, which we are still pursuing with the Minister of Finance, as well as the National Assembly, that maybe just report that only recently the Nigerian Ombudsman, the staff, had to proceed on a 3-week strike because they were not paid minimum wage. But thankfully, we were able to push the case strongly, and the funds were released, they have been paid, and they have resumed work. And we're also watching carefully both the medium-term expenditure framework document submitted to the National Assembly by the President and the budget which is now under consideration. We're hoping, and I've in fact received confirmation in writing from the President of the Senate that he will work hard to improve the budget of the National Assembly. Okay, looks like I hope we still have time to take the few other items before we close. Again, from Nigeria, how can Ombudsman Institution ensure the implementation of its recommendations by the relevant authorities? It's an open question. Can somebody address that? We're talking about enforcement.
I think the public protector in South Africa, the court judgment, the very same one Advocate Mpofu is referring to, the Nkandla judgment, which said the remedial action or the recommendations of the public protector are binding unless set aside by a court of law. So now in South Africa, we received an increased number of review from state institutions since that particular court judgment. So I think that's what we are encouraging state institutions. If you do not agree with our recommendation, then take us on review and as well interdict implementation of our remedial action until such time the court decide on the review. And that's what is happening. So where they are not implemented, the remedial actions, that's why you find political parties like your opposition parties, you find NGOs who will then take the matter to court to force that department to implement the public protector remedial action. That's what happened in the Kandla judgment. That's what happened in the state capture report. So I think if you have very vibrant and NGOs who have the people's interest at heart, they can then assist our institution to take the matters to court. But as Advocate Walters has indicated, also we write to the Speaker to request them to also intervene, to persuade the executive and those departments to implement the remedial actions of the public protector. So in other than areas, I think Kenya has also mentioned that now there is a court judgment which also making the remedial action to be binding. And even Malawi, I know that is the case, though I think it's a challenge because now the ombudsmanship is changing and we are more now litigated against. And that's where you'll also find the issue of personal costs, which are now being enforced against us. So I think having the remedial action as a recommendation and have persuasive powers, it's better off than litigating, which litigation is very much expensive. Thank you.
I think we have virtually treated most of the questions that we have seen either one way or the other. And I want to remind all those who have joined us on this webinar that you are still free to put your questions online and you will receive written answers to those questions even after we have closed the session. So you can still put in your questions and those questions will be answered online and you will receive the report. So we now move.
If you may allow me, yeah, just to mention, in line with what the protector has said, that whereas we had that nice ruling at the level of the appeal court, the same has been escalated to the Supreme Court. The decision at the appeal level is being challenged. Somebody think that the ombudsman should not have their decisions binding as it was pronounced at the Court of Appeal. But we are confident that the Supreme Court, the matter will still be settled in our favor. But the more important and interesting thing I wanted to mention is that, as I said during my presentation, as a country, we have just embarked on a process that lead us to a referendum so that we can be able to make some critical changes on our constitution. One of the proposals that has been made in the draft document is to amend the Constitutive Act of the Ombudsman so that its decision can be binding in line with the decision over the Court of Appeal. And if that's going to happen, I think in our view, it's going to be a game changer. Because right now we are operating with two sets of laws. The access to information law is quite explicit, the decisions are binding. So if the amendment that is being proposed see the light of the day, then now with the CAJ Act, the same will be obtaining without necessarily having to rely on the decision of the court. The decision of the ombudsman will stand binding because now it will be clearly so provided in our acts.
Thank you very much, Advocate Ngaluma, for that intervention. I think generally has been said, once the justice of the case is the basis of the determination of the courts will not ignore it. We now move to the next session, which is the wrap-up, after which we'll be inviting Advocate Busisiwe to close the session. We've had 4 paper presentations today. The first from Advocate Gerald Waters, who is Ombudsman of Namibia, and he raised the fundamental question to challenge us for the day: who protects the protector? And he went on to go through some of the institutional provisions, the provisions of the Constitution, and they identified the issues that put the Ombudsman under threat. He identified interference, threat and intimidation as the major threat to the Ombudsman institution and person. And of course, he mentioned the institution, United Nations. Of course, AOMA is there too, as some of the institutions that can work towards the protection of the protector. Now, we had the presentation from Mr. Ngaluma, who represented the Ombudsman of Kenya, and he centered his presentation on, for us, the unresponsiveness, which is dealing with the issue of recalcitrant respondents, which affects the work of the Ombudsman, and also dealt with the issue of resource constraints, which has run through all the discussion. It's a fundamental problem. Even in the question session, we saw that the issue of poor budgeting was an issue that came in for discussion. He also addressed the issue of reprisals. When the Ombudsman does his job fairly as he should, and then there are reprisals from government or other, important persons who feel personally affected by those decisions. But of course, he brought up the issue of mobilizing funds outside government budgets as one of the solutions. He brought up the issue of target setting and also decentralization to bring the Ombudsman nearer to the person, maybe also to reduce costs. Now, Advocate Dali Mpofu gave us more of a practical presentation of experience he has had, but he challenged us by reminding us that the job of the Ombudsman is by nature a hazardous job. And it's important that an Ombudsman takes that to heart when he accepts the appointment, that he is going into a hazardous undertaking. And therefore, it would be out of place to suggest that he will not meet hazards on the way. He also reminded us that there's a thin line of divide between protecting the institution and protecting the individual who is occupying the office of the public protector or the Ombudsman in the general sense. And they give examples of cases where they are not just threats to the job, but indeed threats to the life of the Ombudsman. In the case of the public protector of South Africa when she released her report. But of course, the encouragement is that once the Ombudsman is confident that his determination is based on justice, fair play, he should have nothing to worry about. There is also the possibility of politicizing decisions of ombudsmen. A decision is made in good faith and by the principles of justice, and yet, because we live in a political environment, those decisions are politicized and considered to be made in favor of a particular political party or persons. Of course, he said the issues that are required to stabilize and remove the threat are security of tenure, remuneration, constitutional provisions, which protect the institution and the person, and the independence of the Ombudsman, and the people. But of course, the issue of the integrity of the Ombudsman was brought to the fore. Once the Ombudsman acts with to face some of these challenges, he can still be sure and have. Now, the presentation from the center is essentially on how the IOI works to ward off these threats to the Ombudsman institution and persons. And he reminded us that the IOI operates in regions and through their regional offices. And once such threats come to the fore, they now go into consultation with those regional representatives to get the facts of the matter, and where they have established that a clear case is made, They make contact with the responsible government in the situation. He spoke about challenges that go with the work of the IOI in protecting the ombuds institution as well of the ombudsmen that run those institutions in their various jurisdictions. So in summary, that's what we had during the presentation by the four presenters. And of course, we had the robust intervention by the Ombudsman of South Africa, who is the president of our IOMA, in several of the cases, including experiences she's had the office in executing the mandate of the public protector. Just to remind us that these presentations will be made available to us later online, so we can have them in our collections. And the questions that have been asked, which have not been answered while in the course of these presentations, will still be answered in the course of time online to those who have made those questions. Let me therefore thank the IORC for organizing this webinar. Let me congratulate once again the Public Protector of South Africa on this celebration of the 25th anniversary. And thank our presenters, Advocate Waters, thank you very much for your intervention. Mr. Ngaluma, thank you for your insights. Dali, Mpofu, thank you very much also for giving us your insight in these various areas. And then we thank in absentia the Ombudsman of Austrian Institute for making sure that his views were brought to us in spite of his limitations and inability to be physically present with us. So I thank you very much. And it is now my pleasure to welcome the President of IOMA and Public Protector of South Africa, Advocate Busisiwe Mkhwebane, to please give us the thank you message.
Ombudsman, Chief Ombudsman of Nigeria, you've done an exceptional facilitation, and already you've thanked all those who participated, the panelists, Advocate Waters, Advocate Ngaluma, and we thank Advocate Dali Mpofu and the IORC team. Thank you so much. We also thank all the participants who are here. We thank Professor MacArthur, who welcomed us, and the UKZN team, which participated, our staff, and everyone who participated. Thank you so much. And this is a very